In this episode on Adversity to Strength, I'm joined by Wendy Alexander, a midlife reinvention strategist, speaker, and founder of Happy Career Hub. Wendy's life is a masterclass in resilience. She grew up as a woman of color under apartheid South Africa, where courage was a daily act of survival. After emigrating to Australia, she endured an armed robbery, the sudden disappearance of her partner while pregnant, and the financial strain of rebuilding from nothing. But instead of giving up, Wendy transformed those challenges into fuel, rising through the corporate leadership before walking away to create a business and life that truly fit her. Today, Wendy helps midlife women reclaim their voice, turn menopause into momentum, and design careers and lives that reflect who they've become, not who they used to be. This conversation is about transformation at any age, how to turn burnout, menopause, and life's hardest chapters into clarity, confidence, and purpose. Wendy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Hello there. How are you, Lee?
I'm all good, thanks. I'm all good. I'm all good that I'm finally getting to speak to you because it's been booked for quite a while. So I'm glad that we're finally here.
Yeah, we finally.
Finally here. All good things. Take us back to the beginning of your journey. Where did it start for you?
Well, obviously South Africa. So I was born in Cape Town and lived there until 1987. Family migrated to Australia, but I lived under, I suppose I should go back a little bit, lived under that regime of apartheid.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, you don't know you're living under that until it's brought to your attention. So as a child, I lived in my community. It was a colored community. The way South African structure was set up back in those days was apartheid was about segregation of races. So there was three. We were segregated in three ways. There was the whites only neighborhoods and facilities. There were the blacks only neighborhoods and facilities, which were mostly impoverished townships. And then there was the colored. So we were somewhere in the middle, right? Which was, when I think back about it now, I realize that we didn't really belong anywhere because certainly the white population didn't want us and the black population didn't trust us because we had a level of privilege that they didn't have. And people who were fair skinned, because there was lots of people there, people that look like me, you can see I'm sort of caramel skin, but then there's also colored people who are quite white looking and have the blue eyes. I have a sister. My younger sister has the light eyes, which she gets from the Scottish side of the family, and very fair skin. So she could easily pass for white. And what we saw in the structures was many coloreds who could pass for white did pass for white. So there was that level of distrust amongst the black people towards us. So in the end, it was kind of like you didn't really belong anywhere. Neither side wanted you, put it that way. But obviously, I don't know all this when I'm growing up as a kid because you're in your neighborhood, you're playing with your friends, you're doing, daily things that happen in the community. And I didn't see white people in my community. I didn't see particularly dark black people. I saw dark-skinned people, but not what you would call African black people. And then one summer we went to the beach. Even the beaches were segregated. So you couldn't go to any beach, right? And we arrived at this beach. It was a remote beach. It was our family and another family, friends of ours. So it was near their place and they took us to this beach. And we didn't realize that the beach was a whites only beach. There were bushes. There's a lot of shrubs and bushes around. And the sign was covered or not very clear. And the sign said whites only. So we didn't see it, went on the beach, probably half an hour, maybe 45 minutes later, policemen approached. And I remember as a child seeing these black shoes, and I can still see it to this day, these black shoes. And then my eyes are going up as the 7-year-old, the gray trousers. And then these two cops are standing there saying, what are you doing? In Afrikaans, they spoke to us, what are you doing here? They asked us. And I looked at my dad and I knew something was wrong because my father, the tension in my dad, when you're a kid, you don't always understand everything that's going on, but energy and tension. And I remember my father becoming really rigid. And then they gathered up things and my dad said, we need to go. And I was always this curious, probably annoyingly curious kid. And I'm like, why do we have to go? And I'm like asking my dad and my dad's like, he takes us to the car, we get in the car and I'm pestering him. Like, what was that about? And my father said to me, can you for once in your life just be quiet? And that's when I knew something was very wrong because my father and I were very close. I had a real interest in books and literature and my dad used to read to me. He taught me to play chess at a very young age, all of these things. And my father was always nurturing my curious mind. He'd never ever told me to be quiet. And so I was like, this is weird. Like, why is Dad saying that? But I was like, because I was so shocked that he said to me, can you just be quiet? So we drove home in silence, got home. And when we got home, he sat the kids down and he said, this is South Africa. This is what you're growing up in. This is what apartheid means. And I think it was kind of like for me, when I look back now, at the time I didn't realize it, but when I look back now, it was like the childhood just went, like it was lost in that moment because
Yeah.
because I remember becoming a very serious child. My dad, because I remembered, because Dad said to us, this is the circumstances. You're going to have to work twice as hard to even get opportunities. If you want to go to university one day, we can't afford it. He said most of the Black population will never be able to go to university. And so you're going to have to work hard and try and win a scholarship. All of these things he was telling us. And I was just like, wow. And realized that it was like that whole lightness of childhood was lifted off the shoulders. And I became incredibly serious, started working really hard at school, got good grades, but was always then aware, because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So everywhere we went, I remember when we went into the city at Christmas time to do Christmas shopping, I started to notice the signs, the shops, the restaurants, all the things that you
Yeah.
couldn't go into. So it was bizarre growing up in that whole environment. And then when I sort of got to teenage years, probably about 14, 15, I became incredibly rebellious. So I didn't like what I was seeing anymore. And there was a level of bravado, I suppose. So I became politically active and I started going to rallies and, participating in the resistance against the government. And that in itself was dangerous because, you were whipped, you were tear gassed, the police were opening fire every time there was a march. I mean, sometimes kids were killed because they'd open fire, and you'd be running. So I was caught up in all that chaos. Now, when I look back, I mean, and I have been through psychotherapy and things like that, I know that my parasympathetic nervous system was in overdrive and just on high alert my whole life. And I have had some health issues. And when I look back, I believe it's probably started there.
Yeah.
That adrenaline going through the body all the time, never being able to relax, on high alert, looking around, all of this type of thing. So, South Africa was a challenge. My father tried to discourage me from my political activism because my father believed that education was an answer. So Dad went into a lot of the townships and he was teaching Black people to read and write and up trying to elevate mathematics and literacy and all of that because there wasn't a lot of opportunities for them. So that was his contribution to the cause. He was a lot more passive, I suppose you could say, and was trying to make the difference through education. Whereas I was so angry and rebellious. I mean, I look back on the poetry I wrote during the time. It was dark, it was angry, it was rebellious, it was, I was trying to change the system. But as I got older, I recognized, I mean, look, by that stage, just before we left South Africa, and it was 1987, so I was almost 20 years old. I started to recognize because a lot of people were dying in the struggle, I had friends who were imprisoned, some female friends who were raped in prison, so lots of stuff like that was happening. And we lost a lot of people. And I started to see that maybe that wasn't the answer. You're fighting for a cause, but you're also dying in the process. And a lot of
Yeah.
significant people like Stephen Biko were murdered in prison and all of these type of things. And so I did start to eventually pull back and really zone in on my education. And I ended up winning a scholarship to go to the University of Cape Town. Had to write an essay. Thank God it was writing an essay because literature, writing, reading, that was what always drove me. That was my comfort, I suppose, and I loved words. So I wrote a great essay, won the scholarship, and was able to go to university. So I completed my first year in Cape Town, and then we migrated in 87, and I continued my university studies at Monash University here in Melbourne. So yeah, after South Africa was the migration to Australia, and that came with its challenges.
Yeah.
Migration's not
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah. Tell us about the migration. How did that come up for you to come to Australia?
So Dad had been trying for about 10 years prior to that. So here's a lesson in resilience. Because my
10 years.
dad, when he started to see what was happening, because my brother and I would go to university or go to school and so on, and we were often caught in the crossfire of political violence. There'd be tires thrown on the road and burning tires and stones through bus windows. My mother was a nervous wreck because she didn't know if her kids were going to come home safe. Would my kids come home alive from school was her, and so my mother's blood pressure was going through the roof. And so my father started to look at migration, but we were rejected many times.
What was the reason?
Well, look, I think back then Australia was at that stage coming to the end of its white Australia policy, right? So Australia also had a history. There was a white Australia policy
Yeah.
where they were only accepting white migrants, right? So there was, I mean, Australia's history is not as dark as South Africa's history, but it certainly has some big question marks over it.
Yeah, with like the treatment towards the Aborigines.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And also they did. I mean, I didn't know this. I found this out only many years after I'd migrated, that Australia once upon a time had a white Australia policy. They were trying to increase the white population rather than just bringing in migrants from different parts of the world.
There's a really good film with Kenneth Branagh called Rabbit Proof Fence.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen it at all.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I an Aussie guy that I work with, and he told me to watch that film, and I watched it, and I had no idea that kind of that thing had ever happened. Trying to like breed out Aborigines there, and it didn't stop until, was it like the 60s or the 70s or
That's
something
right.
like that?
Absolutely. Yep. So, recent history, just like South Africa. South Africa was only what I call liberated, and I put it in inverted commas because mindset takes many years to change, right? 94. So that's recent too. Mandela became the prime minister in 94, and that was when apartheid was dismantled, right? So it was many years of that kind of life. Back to the story, we migrated. Migration is difficult. A lot of people don't realize. And when you go to a new country, you have to get used to the way things are done in that country. And it was interesting. It was better, but it took us a while to adapt. And I think a lot of people don't realize when you've lived with trauma or you've lived with civil violence or political violence, you don't really know that that's impacted you until much later. And one of the ways I recognize, and it wasn't immediately when we came to Australia, was I was going to the city one day with my cousin who'd been here 5 years before us. I remember as we were waiting for the train, I said to her, as the train pulled in, I said, "What carriage do I get on?" And she looked at me and she goes, "You're not in South Africa anymore. You can get on any carriage," because I was looking for my carriage, the one that said colored zone. So, and it was startling to recognize that I was still carrying that subliminal programming within me, that I was looking for stuff in a country that was nowhere, nothing like the country I'd come from. And that was actually when I went to I undertook my first lot of psychotherapy, because I was like,
what year was that?
So it was 88. So we had come here in 87. It was 1988. And I recognized that there was stuff that I was carrying in that moment. It was bizarre. Sometimes it's just a moment. But I was like, man, you still carrying all this crap. Look at you looking. And I also recognized that my nervous system hadn't calmed down. I was still very edgy. I never felt relaxed. People were very curious about me at university because when they heard I came from Cape Town, South Africa, they looked at the color of my skin. People were bombarding me with questions. What was it like? Blah, blah, blah. And I remember not wanting to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I was like, I've already lived this. I don't need to relive it.
Just live this. Yeah. How did you discover psychotherapy? I mean, this is 1988 and you're only 21, 22 years of age. I don't know many people thinking about psychotherapy back then.
Well, I actually stumbled on some of Louise Hay's work, and it was about healing your body and healing your life. I think I stumbled on some of that type of work, and Wayne Dyer. And then somewhere, maybe in one of the books I read, that sometimes you need to go get external help. And I didn't know what that meant, right? Because I was like, I don't know how to navigate myself. I know that I'm nervous, I'm edgy, and then actually the thing that really put me into that line of work was the bank robbery. So I landed my first job, 88, 89. I was coming to the end of my degree, landed my first job at the bank. And within 2 months of starting that job, the bank was held up. Yeah. And I was the teller who had the gun pointed to my head. That was the start, actually, when I think back, because it was the combination of getting on the train. It wasn't 88, it was 89. Getting on the train with a cousin and asking that question, but then being held up. And it was the bank that introduced it. The bank got us the psychological help.
Right. Okay. Okay.
And
Oh,
that's when it
that's great.
started.
Yeah.
That was actually when it started for me. I was like, because after that bank robbery, there was a lot of nightmares. I couldn't sleep.
Yeah. That's trauma. That's your PTSD.
The PTSD, but also recognizing that I was really edgy. I had been really edgy. I hadn't relaxed into Australia, put it that way.
Right.
I'd
Well, you've not been
migrated
there
with,
that long.
beg your pardon?
You've not been there that long.
So it was
And
two
in
years. Yeah,
two
it
years,
was
somebody's putting a gun to your head, which you would have, I guess, would have thought this would only have happened back in Africa,
correct.
back in South Africa. You
Well,
weren't
I
in
had
Australia.
developed a real aversion and a fear of guns because my final exam when I matriculated was written in a military base, because back then the violence in the country, the civil disobedience, all of that was off the charts, and all schools, all black and colored schools were closed. But we were still expected to write the final exam. And so there was a lot of clandestine activity. We were sneaking to our teachers' houses. They were teaching us in their homes. And when we wrote the exam, we had to go to there was a pickup point at these showgrounds, which used to be the fairgrounds when they had these fairs. Pickup point was there. My father would drop me off there, and then we were picked up by these military guys in the bus, and we wrote in a military base surrounded by soldiers with guns. And I remember sitting in that exam and being so tense and so afraid, because I was like, my God, what if something happens and they just start shooting, right? So I hated guns from that moment on. And then, a year and a half, 18 months later, when I'm living in Australia, I'm in this bank robbery, held up at gunpoint, double barrel shotgun. So yeah, I suppose the trauma at that stage was off the chart.
Yeah.
I was like, I couldn't sleep. So that was, and then the bank had offered that counseling, and I didn't immediately take them up on it. But when the nightmare started, I went back to the HR department and said, listen, I'm not sleeping. And they said, well, the office there, that's why we created it for, especially, the HR woman said to me, I wanted you to do it more than anyone else because you're the
Yeah.
one that had the gun to your head. So I did. And that was the beginning of getting that external help that I suppose I, at the time, didn't think I needed, but then realized I couldn't do it on my own. I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't let go of or even process that level of trauma or that level of nervousness in my entire body, And so that was the start. And I had probably a year of there, and then, got into my relationship with my daughter's father. And, a couple of years or 10 years later, we were together almost 9 years. We had probably 5, 6 good years, I would say. And then it started to be really difficult. And there were patterns in him I was noticing. So look, he had his own trauma. I wasn't able to see it when I was in the relationship. He came from Harlem, New York, rough,
All right. Back in the day, Harlem.
back in the day, not gentrified Harlem, but rough as guts Harlem.
Yeah.
So there was trauma he'd seen too much in his life,
Yeah.
and there
Yeah.
was that propensity towards violence and all of this type of thing with him. And so when I was 4 months pregnant, the relationship ended, and it did end with domestic violence. That's why it ended.
Right.
I walked away, almost lost the baby, had to be helped at hospital and all of this type of things. So and so I had to return to counseling again, to
Right.
psychotherapy, because that was another level of trauma, having to start all over again, losing my house. I'd worked 3 jobs to get that home.
Right.
And then he buggers off, deserts me and the baby, although I found out he was having an affair. So I ended the relationship. But before we terminated he came after me. You would have sworn I'd had the affair the way he reacted. And that was when the domestic violence occurred. The neighbor heard me screaming and called the police, and a restraining order was put on him. And that's how I had to start all over again, with nothing, because at that stage, the house had to go on the market. He walked away from all the responsibility, and the house sold at a loss. So I started life with my daughter with a massive debt on my shoulders, and had to move back home with my parents, and that was where it started for me. So that was, for me, that was the rock bottom. But it was
Yeah.
also the rock bottom from which I turned my life around.
Yeah. So just before we go to that part there as well, was there a part where your ex disappeared for a while.
He just once the split happened, he didn't have anything to do with us for a number of years. I think he came like despite everything that happened, I was very conscious of never holding my daughter from her father, right?
Yeah,
And I remember having to battle the parents, my parents and my siblings, because they were angry. They were, my brothers wanted to kill this guy,
yeah,
But I remember a few years later, he sort of reappeared and wanted to see her. And the family is like totally against it, So I'm battling the family because they protective of me and her. Um, and he did. I did allow him to see her, and he was in her
mhm.
life for a number of years and then disappeared again. So at age 9, he disappeared from her life completely.
That was it for
Um,
good.
that was, yeah, he just, he was a very strange person. It was around Father's Day and he was supposed to have her, but I had been in a car accident and my car was written off. I was in a neck brace and I
Sure.
was I was letting him, sending messages and letting him know that he needed to come and pick her up. But I don't know what was going on in his life because we were done by that stage and I was never trying to find out what was going on in his life. But he didn't listen to his messages, I think. And then on the Sunday of Father's Day, he rang and she answered the phone. My daughter, she was 9, and he rang and he just yelled and screamed down the phone at her. And she just threw the phone down, burst into tears, was crying. And so I picked the phone up. I'm like, who is this? Why is she crying? And then he starts yelling at me. He goes, I'm supposed to have her and blah, blah, blah. And he's screaming. He had that would go off. It was always these crazy moods and things. And I said to him, have you checked your messages? I said, I've been trying to call you since Friday. I've been in a car accident. You have to actually come pick her up. I can't drop her to you. I don't have a car and I can't drive. But he was so awful. I ended up saying, don't call this home again and stay away from her. That was when I put the foot down and
Yeah,
she never heard from him again. He never ever tried to reach out again. So yeah, she's pretty much been without her dad since then. But she
yeah,
has my partner now, my new partner, who's been like a father to her.
yeah.
So there was a lot of things in life. I mean, adversity, you talk about that. I've been through it numerous,
Oh,
numerous, numerous times.
yeah, your strength's unbelievable. Going back to you've lost your house, you've been saddled with debt through no fault of your own, and then you're at your parents. It sounds like you've got great parents, and that's so
Yeah,
important.
yeah,
It's settle for that. I had terrible parents, and what you wouldn't do for a great set of parents. It always gives me a warm feeling when I speak to somebody and they had a good set of parents. Yeah,
yeah.
you're there, rock bottom. You've got a new daughter, debt, but great parents. What are you thinking now? What's your plans now?
Well, one thing I want to say about my parents as well was that there was a time my father and I, now we were close, as I alluded to. He used to read to
Yeah,
me, taught me about Shakespeare, read the classics to me, all of these things. So Dad and I were always very close. The only time my relationship severed with my father was when I started dating my daughter's father. My father knew. He was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
this guy is not the right guy for you. But when you're in love and you're stubborn and you have to. And what I will say is when all of that went down, when I lost everything, I was pregnant, my father came and picked me up and he said, you're coming home. And my dad could have said, I told you so, but
Yeah.
he never, ever said that to me. Never. He just nurtured me back to good health. Him and my mother nurtured me back to good health, took care of me through that almost losing the baby. And the first months of her life, they were besotted with their grandchild. She was the first grandchild. And so they nurtured her, cared for. I went through postnatal depression as well after she was born. I didn't know what was happening to me. My mother recognized something was off, and she would just bring the baby to me and say, all you have to do is feed her. All you have to do is feed her. We will take care of her. And they did. Diapers were changed, and I eventually, it probably was 3 months of that postnatal that my parents nurtured me through and helped me take care of my baby, make sure we were both safe. My mother was constantly keeping an eye on me, making sure. She said, just go to sleep, just feed her, and would put me back to bed, go to sleep. She said, you just need to rest. All the stuff you've been through, my body was just, it couldn't, my body and mind couldn't cope with that. And so after the breakup, there was a moment where I realized I had to restart. And so I booked myself I was like, okay, I need to go and see someone again. So this is probably at this stage, it's the third or fourth time in my life that I'm going to
Mhm.
do some psychotherapy. And The psychotherapist was amazing in that she let me do my crying and my blaming and my feeling sorry for myself for probably 2 or 3 sessions. And then it was the third or fourth session, she asked me a question, which I think my reaction was very negative towards it. But when I look back, it was the most important question anyone had ever asked me, because she said to me, okay, this has happened. There's been all this trauma. And then she said, with regards to your partner, your ex-partner, she said, what was it within you that attracted that to you? She said, you're an intelligent woman, she said. So, and I remember getting really angry,
Yeah.
feeling like I wanted to punch her, actually, to be
Yeah.
honest, violent anger. But she recognized, she saw the body language, and she said, before you answer me and before you react, she said, you're a writer and you've been journaling for years. You've told me how you like to write poetry, how you've written about everything you've been through, how you journal. She said, before you react, I want you to pause. I want you to go home and take out your journal and just answer that question. Answer the question unfiltered. She said, because you get your answers through writing.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And she said, I see you again in 2 weeks' time. So she said, so you've got 2 weeks to answer that question. She said, let it rip. Whatever
Yeah.
comes up, let it come up. And I did that. And through the writing, I recognized that there was a very strong pattern of trauma, violence, self-esteem issues, from being
Yeah.
coded at a young age that you're not good enough, that your skin is the
Yeah.
color,
Yeah.
meaning this, that, and the other. And I started to see that flow through all the writing. And by the time I came back to her, all the desire to punch her and not answer the question had subsided, because it was being revealed to me through the writing. And then we spoke, that was where we started the journey of the healing. Was like, okay, now we need to look at the strategies that you put in place to rebuild your self-esteem, to figure out life going forward. Because one of the things I do remember, like my dad, when we were young, he used to say to us, you can either become a victim of life or you could become a victor of life. He
Yeah.
said, you get to choose. And somehow those words came back to me, and I recognized I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be a victim.
No.
And I was raising a girl, and I was like, I don't want her to grow up watching a woman be a victim of life.
Yeah.
So I became very driven by that. And that was when I started to look, okay, what's the first thing you need to do? The first thing I needed to do was I needed to make more money. I was like,
Always.
you need to make more money, because you need to get out of this situation. You've got to pay back the debt. You've got to and I did. I went to the bank. I negotiated the payments with the bank. I will say, sometimes when you step forward in life and you ask for help, or you recognize that you need help, I think the universe is generous. It usually sends it, because the first person who helped me when I recognized I need to now create my strategies was the bank manager. She was a female. I went to see her. I said, this is what's happened in my life. There's this debt. I need to make more money. I don't know how to repay it. And she was one of the kindest people I met, because she sat down with me. She created a payment plan strategy. And she said, okay, this, as long as you pay this every week, we'll keep working out. We will review and we will reassess and we will whatever. And then I said to her, when I make extra money, I'm going to pay extra. And I did. I held to my word as I started to, gain experience and become better. And parallel to that, I also was like, okay, how do I make more money? I need to talk to the people that hire people, the people who give people jobs. I need to talk to someone who's going to give me a job that's going to pay me more money. And that for me identified was the recruiters or hiring managers in companies. So despite being someone who loves being in my little den writing, there's a hermit personality to me. I recognized I had to step out of the comfort zone. I had to go talk to the people that could potentially give me an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to approach recruiters that I knew. I started to approach hiring people that I knew, HR people. And I just said, can I have a coffee with you? Can I ask you some questions? There again, kindness. People, I'd say 95% of them gave me time. There were one or two that didn't. Okay, I just moved on. Sat down, picked their brains. They looked at my resume. They said, this resume needs to be tighter. You need to interview better. They gave me tips on how to interview. So, and I was gathering all this information from all these different people. And then an opportunity came up for me to interview. And I had put a figure in my mind, and my figure was, I need to make $20,000 more a year. And I'm like, who the heck is going to give me that? And how am I going to do it? But I started applying for these jobs, being bold, landed an interview with one of them, had the interview, didn't get the job. I was bitterly disappointed because that job was paying about $22,000 more than I was earning. I was like, oh. And so I was, cried and was very, very upset about it. But one of the recruiters that I'd been talking to regularly, I said, this happened and I didn't get the job. And she said, so what are you going to do about it? She said, listen, go back to that interviewer and ask them what tips they can give you and why. Just ask them what was their selection process. She said, don't bombard them with why didn't you choose me? Ask intelligent questions and say, what was the selection process? How could I have improved? Things like that, which I did. And the interviewer was fantastic. She gave me the feedback. She said, look, you waffled on many answers. You spoke too long on some answers. You didn't seem confident and you didn't have she said you didn't have strong examples. So when I asked you certain questions, you couldn't back up your statements with good examples. Okay, so she said, and here's how you practice. And so she gave me a list of questions. She said, practice with whoever will listen to you. She said, and I did, including the baby. The baby would be in the bouncer net and I'd be talking to the baby, practicing my interview with. And I was like, do what you have to do. And I did. And then probably 7 or 8 weeks after that failed interview, I landed another opportunity. And this time I was ready and I'd practiced and I'd used all the type of strategies she'd given me and I got the job. And the job was double the income than what I needed. So it catapulted me massively. That was the start. That was the start of life turning around, landing this role. Parallel to that, as I was growing, so this was probably 9 months or so down the track from coming off maternity leave, I landed this opportunity, left the company that I've been working with. But people around me saw that I had gone from rock bottom, losing everything, moving back in with my parents, having to re-nurture myself back to health and well-being. My friends, my family, and my colleagues at work saw that, and they started to ask me for help. That was how my business was born.
Tell me about your business.
So the business was that people came and just asked for help. They said, how did you do it? And I said, with great difficulty, but with a lot of consistency. I said, and basically never giving up.
Yeah.
And so I started to teach people the strategies that I had gathered from the various recruiters and the hiring people. And I created my own framework and started to teach them what I'd done, what I'd practiced, how I'd written my resume. And believe me, I had rewritten it a gazillion times before it landed. The interview practice, what the interviewer had told me and how I practiced and all of these things. And I started to help people and they started to get these great jobs. And so very soon it was word of mouth, but I had landed this massive opportunity in corporate. And so I could only do the coaching or the helping 5 hours a week. And that's all I did. For 23 years, that was all I did. 5 hours a week, helping people and climbing in the corporate career, growing, I worked different contracts. I started to work contracts. I became known, with this ability of delivering these very difficult projects. And so I worked in various companies, telcos, in insurance companies, the banking industry. Because once you...
Just a quick one. How come you were able to deliver such difficult projects? How come you were able to do that?
I think because after being through all that I had been through, there's a stubbornness, there's a resilience, there's a, I'm not giving up. We're going to make this happen. But there was also a recognition that people had helped me through some of my very difficult times. And when you step forward and you recognize that you can help other people, there's like a sacred bond that happens between you and them. And people step up to deliver. And I suppose learned the secret of how to get the best out of people, because I was not a great techie type of person. And yet I was working in information technology. I was delivering huge programs of work. But I was very good at people management, very good at growing people, very good at figuring out where the gaps were in their learning, providing the training and making sure that they were up to speed and encouraging them. I was also able to, I could pick out the people who were struggling, maybe because I had struggled so much. And so when people struggled in the workplace, I noticed it very quickly. And I would take them aside and I would try not to probe into their personal life, but I would just say, listen, I'm noticing there's a certain struggle, or you seem reticent, or you afraid or something, like, can I help you with anything? And a lot of the time it was personal stuff. People were also going through personal stuff. And then I tried to create a space for them to feel safe, for them to grow, for them to learn. And I think when you do that for people, you elicit a level of loyalty. And that has been the keystone to my success in life, is because even some of the people who reported to me, because I was in project office management for a lot of years, so I was managing all the PMO and all the teams, 30 direct reports, sometimes 40 something indirect reports. People started to look at me as someone that always tried to help them grow. Whether it was, and even in the career space, like I taught them a lot of if someone wanted to grow beyond our project, I never held people back. I always was like, you need to grow as far as you can go. And if that means I lose you as a team member, so be it, right? But what happened is some of those people went on to other companies, and then they would land in these great projects, and an opportunity would come up, and they call me back and they go, hey, there's a great PMO role here, and you would be just the person to manage this project. Are you interested? Do you want me to put your res? So I got my opportunities from the people who had reported to me, but also from leadership people who I had reported to. Because there was one guy I worked with. He took me on 5 different projects with him into 5 different companies because he was confident, he trusted me, liked the way I handled the team and the staff. So, once I landed that opportunity, after that, I rarely had to look for my opportunities. They found me. They found me through growing people. I would
I
say
think
was probably,
I think it's a lot of good karma as well.
yeah,
You've put out there and you get it back. People's not
absolutely.
the impact you've had on people's lives, and people don't forget that. A lot of people don't forget that. And if they can repay you, so not that you were doing it for that, but
No.
for me, that's your good karma coming back towards you. So that's good.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I think that played a part is the level of authenticity and vulnerability. I never hid
Yeah.
my story from people. So when I would meet people who were struggling at work, I noticed that I would pull them aside, always do it privately. I would share what had gone through. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it inspired them. They're like, oh God, if you can do this,
It,
you were
it,
the single
it,
mom.
it will do. It will do. Your stories is going to inspire people, and people just look at you as strength, but you've still got that kindness and that caring. You could be a complete opposite to that with everything you've been through. You could be against the world, but instead you're the opposite. So when people hear your story, just hearing your story, and then you see how empathetic you are towards them, people are only going to resonate to you and listen to you, and they're going to take on board. That's why I'd imagine that the vast majority of people you had were really willing and keen to listen to every word you said.
Yeah, they did, because I didn't hold back things. I said, I've been there. I know how hard it is. I know what it's like to be at rock bottom and to feel so terrified and not even know where to start. But then you start. And when you
Yeah.
start, and I said, sometimes, I do, like you, I believe in good karma. I believe in, when you take a step forward, the universe will rise to meet you.
Yeah.
It rises to meet you, and people turn up, opportunities turn up. Sometimes we miss them, we're not ready for certain things, but sometimes we are, and you jump in, and the moment you jump in, you find that you're stronger than you think you are. That's what I discovered about myself. That's been the great thing that I discovered, because I think I've had a stubborn streak in me. That's evident from even the political activism, getting rebellious, and I'm going to go get
Yeah.
the man, the government, or whatever. There's a stubbornness in me, but there's also a recognition that for a long time I did feel quite powerless growing up in the country I grew up in. And then
Cool.
when you're in a bank robbery, you're definitely powerless. If you make one wrong move,
Yeah.
your brains can be blown out. And then also
Yeah.
in that relationship that, where he was a very tall, strong man. He was a basketball player, 6'8" tall, you know.
Yeah.
And so there's all of that. But I recognize, as I came through all the different things that I'd been through, I know that I'm stronger than I thought I was. And I'm not afraid anymore,
Oh,
because once you've been through things like that, you recognize that even if things went to crap tomorrow, there is a resilience within me, and I will rise
yeah.
again. I
Oh,
can
without a
rise
doubt.
again.
Without a doubt. Yeah. That's without question. You
Yeah.
can see that just listening to the way you come across, listening to your story. There's no doubt there. Just listen. There's nothing that you can't do or overcome. And that's why
No.
I think a lot of people will find you so inspiring. Just listen to your story. And it's not just listen to your story. It's just the way you say the story and it comes along with real genuine confidence in a really positive way. You're focused, whatever comes your way, you know that you'll look at it as an obstacle and how do I overcome that and move on from it. So it's almost like you're
That's right.
unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, and yet it's funny from where I grew up. I never thought that as a child, because you feel quite powerless. You think like forces beyond yourself are controlling an
Yeah.
environment and you only have this amount of opportunity. But I've realized that if you want it and if you want to grow and you want to grow from adversity, you can. Anybody can.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's always been my message to people is, and the one thing I will say to people is sometimes don't try to take on everything at once. Like I realized when that situation happened and I hit rock bottom, what was the one thing I needed to do immediately? The immediate thing was I needed to make more money. Okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? That looks like stepping out of the comfort zone, coming out of the writer's den and going to talk to people. Scared. I was terrified. I was afraid of rejection. I did get rejected once or twice, but most people didn't. Here's the other thing. When you ask, you're likely to get a yes. When you don't ask, it's always a no.
It's always a no.
It's always a
Yeah.
no. And so when I work with my clients, I'm like, you know what? Just ask. Because the women that I work with mostly are going through massive changes in both their physical bodies, and that usually leads to emotional and mental changes that they want to make as well. They no longer want
Yeah.
to be under pressure. And that's what made me leave corporate eventually. It was midlife came. It was hard on me. I didn't have an easy menopause or entry into menopause.
Yeah.
And so left and do my business full time now because I love it. It makes a difference to people. I can work my hours now that I want to work. I don't have to do the long 10, 12-hour corporate days anymore, because when you're in that high-powered position, big responsibilities come with it. The big paycheck comes with it, but you're
Yeah.
also delivering 200, 300, 400 million dollar programs of work. That is big money, meaning you accountable to the boards and the executives. And, in the end, it didn't marry, it didn't align with the difficulties of menopause, and that was what made me leave. So I'm no longer in corporate. I work with a lot of corporates. I know the industry still very well. I stay very connected to it, but I work my business and I work it on my terms.
How long have you been working just for yourself now?
So it's going on to the almost seventh year, actually.
Seventh year.
Yeah,
Seventh year.
yeah, yep. So I'm also at the other end of that menopausal journey, and I will say hurrah, thank God for that. That's a hard one because you don't know. As a woman, you don't know how you're going to experience it. You don't.
Yeah.
And all the
Yeah.
women I've spoken to, I've done a lot of research on it. I've written a book on it. All the women I've spoken to, none of them knew how it was going to show up for them. And for some, it was easy. That was a very small minority. It was an easy journey, but for most women, it's a very difficult journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I had many clients that go through the menopause and they're trying to get their estrogen right. They're trying to get the balances correct there. It's not easy. There's so
No,
much
it's
they
not.
got to do. I just really feel because it is certainly far from fun there.
No.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm a guy.
My partner always says, because he obviously was with me through that whole journey, but I wrote a book about it, and the book was based on a lot of my journaling through menopause. So there's a lot of raw elements in it. And it was only when he read it, he said, "My God, I lived with you. I was with you through this, and I had no idea what you were going through internally." Because especially when you
Yeah.
get the brain fog,
Yeah.
it damaged my confidence, to be honest. Because when you're strong, when you've overcome lots of things, when you've been working in corporate all these years and you've been succeeding and climbing the ladder and doing really well and raising my daughter, and being a partner to my now partner, you just feel like you're on top of the world. And then menopause comes, suddenly your brain, you're not sleeping. And you're just like, what is happening to me? What is
Yeah.
happening to me, and how do I stop it? You know?
Yeah, and with the brain fog, I've seen it on in the UK. You got Davina McCall. He's very big
Yes.
into. I've read her book, parts of the book, and I watched the documentary, and she thought she had Alzheimer's, and it's brain
Yes.
fog. Yeah,
Yes.
I found it really interesting. It really helped me with being able to understand some of my clients a lot better.
Yeah.
It makes such a difference because a lot of the clients, as you know, they haven't got anyone to talk to about it, and their partners won't understand because you can't unless you actually do the research and understand. But even then, you're not going to know. You can guess, you
No.
can assume, but you're not going to feel it. And when you've got like a woman that could be drop dead gorgeous, saying that she feels past it and over the hill and she's waiting to die, and all these negative things, and it's all
Hmm.
because of the menopause there as well. It's hard for a lot of guys to be able to manage it, to do the right thing, snap, bite their head off.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, you're dealing with someone who's not herself anymore,
Yeah,
and she doesn't even know that fully because it
yeah,
does take a while to figure it out. And then you've got to go on the journey of, well, how do I manage this? How do I make sure that the symptoms don't impact me so much? And sleep becomes really important, but sleep is the one thing
yeah,
that stuffs you up. You suffer from insomnia. And I mean, there's just so many
yeah.
things that I didn't know about it that it unraveled me in quite a big way. But I did recognize that it didn't go with the stress of a high-powered job. And so for me, that
No.
was one of the things I needed to change. And I'm still working on strategies to continue. I'm at the tail end of it now, so thankfully not going through crazy symptoms like I did for the past 5, 6 years. But I still know that when I need to rest, I need to rest. When I need to go for a
Yeah,
walk, I need to go for a walk. When I need to shut my calendar down and say, you know what, I've seen too many clients this week. I need to close the
yeah,
calendar because I need to pause. All of
yeah.
that, you start to get better at doing it, but you're not good at it immediately. It takes a
No.
minute, takes a while.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of listening to your body. I say it constantly with my clients. Listen to your body. Don't ignore it. Don't soldier on. Listen to what it's
Yeah.
telling you. And that will save you a lot of pain because
Yeah.
eventually you'll pay the price for it as well.
Yeah.
So it's good that you've got so much knowledge and experience in that area. So there's a lot of your clients that you could pass that on to as well, which are probably so grateful for you to be able to do that as well as everything else that you help them with.
Yeah. 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 I love working. I mean, I don't only work with midlife women, but they are most of my clientele because
Yeah.
there are some guys, I work with some executive guys who get to a point and they want to make
Mhm.
changes in their life. They've been doing the
Yeah.
high-powered CEO role for so long, and the kids are
Yeah.
grown, they done with college, and the guys are going, I want to do something more meaningful. I don't want to do this grind because it is when you're in these high powered jobs, you constantly have
Yeah.
to be performing at high levels because otherwise you lose your edge and someone else is ready to take your spot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do work with some guys who, and a lot of them I notice there's a trend. They looking for more meaningful work. So a lot of them end up in non-profit roles. They help
Yeah.
companies or organizations that are trying to really make an impact in the community. These guys have got this great knowledge and they transition into these companies and they're so much happier. Some of them are not anywhere near the paychecks that they were, but they don't need to be anymore because house is paid off, this and that's done. And so now they're looking for meaningful work. And this stage of life, I love the midlife years. I never thought I would. And especially when I entered it with such a crash. But now I'm at that stage, I'm 2 years off of 60. And I'm just like, I'm ready for that next phase. I'm ready for that. I think it's called meaningful work. It's called, for me, it's contribution back. Time to
Yeah.
give back. Time to mentor the young ones coming up behind me, pass on the knowledge, help them get great careers so that they can, go on and achieve some of their goals, but then also helping people my age and beyond, especially women, go and do jobs that aren't going to be so stressful, that are going to make them happy to get out of bed every morning. Love Monday
Yeah.
mornings rather than dread it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, if you can go to work on a Monday morning enjoying your job, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
You're doing something right. And that makes a massive difference. The difference between doing something you love and something that just pays the bills is poles
Yeah.
apart.
Yeah. Absolutely. And why can't you have both? I mean, it
You
is
just tend to have
possible.
to, of course it is. You just tend to have to work harder for it usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, And obviously, with what you're doing, that's going to help a lot of women, guys go in that direction to do what they want to do. It might not be doing the super high powered jobs because that they might not want to do that anymore.
No.
I walked away from well paid sales jobs. I couldn't think of anything worse that I'd want to do now
Yeah.
compared to where I'm at now. And if you can give that for the difference in doing something that you're fulfilled in. Yes, you need to pay the bills, of course you do, but
Yeah.
being fulfilled in something, and like I'm going from my experience being a therapist, to be able to help other people, it generally does make a difference. It really does.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Because for me, when there are difficult days, because life is challenging. None of us
Yeah.
go through life and just have, these years and years and years of pure happiness. That is not reality. Reality
No,
is that there's always going to be a curveball. You're going to have to
always.
navigate curveballs. But I find that doing meaningful work in the moments when life gets difficult, I have something meaningful to focus on, and it helps me get through those times. You know,
Yeah.
there's a purpose that drives what I do. And so, I am enjoying life, and I navigate some of the harder moments a lot quicker and a lot easier. I've got a lot of tools. I've been through psychotherapy and things many times now because I've had to process my own traumas. And so I have a toolkit. I have things that I know I can use. I have mindfulness. I have meditation. Nature walks for me is like the biggest healer. And I do it regularly. I live right on a trail. There's literally a creek outside my door and a walking trail, and I'm on that trail daily, twice a day sometimes. Pause usually around lunchtime or maybe a little bit sometimes past lunchtime, and I go and do my 30-40 minute walk because I need to hear the birds. I need to see the
Yeah.
stream. All of those things just calm everything, keep the nervous system nice and calm. So, I mean,
Yeah.
whatever strategy works for people, find the thing that takes you back to your own inner being and inner spirit.
Yeah, definitely. And being at one with nature is one of the best things that anyone can do,
Absolutely.
without a doubt. What do you think the future is for yourself? It feels like you're just getting started on this, even though you've been doing it like 6, 7 years. It just feels like there's so much more that you want to do and achieve.
Well, for me, writing has always been a big factor. Like I've journaled all of my life. I've written poetry and things like that. So I'm starting to write books about my experiences. I've written a book on my journey through menopause. That's up on Amazon because I'm trying to show women that we can come through that stage. Yes, it is difficult. Yes, and I'm fairly raw about the whole journey. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I have a beautiful Yorkshire Terrier dog who I absolutely love, who's like my little companion and go take on the walk. I've just finished a book which is going through edits at the moment called The Dog Code, which is the lessons I've learned from observing the dog. Because humans, we miss a lot of lessons. Dogs, animals, they can teach you so much. So my partner and I've been gathering notes on animals because we love animals and we love dogs. And so it's a leadership book, but it's through the eyes of a dog and how dogs operate in life and what we can learn. The wolf pack, the
Yeah.
ancient wisdom of the wolf pack, that's kind of the theme of the book. So that was a delight. So I'm getting back into the writing. For me, there's probably lots of books for the future, lots of writing. What I have noticed is that AI has diminished some of the writing side of my business because a lot of people are using AI to do their resume. So a lot of people don't come to me. I've lost clientele in terms of the writing side. Where people still come and where they still need help is the interview coaching side because they've tried it with AI and they can't do it and it doesn't
It,
work.
it's a bit like therapy. You could probably get away with AI giving you some tips and strategies, but you don't have that personal connection. You don't
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
we're pivoting the business to be mostly Happy Career Hub is pivoting to mostly help people through winning in their interviews. So that's happening now. And so the new year will be a different slant of promotion around the business. So for me, between the interview coaching and the writing, I have got my dream life. And then travel is big on my list. I go every year on a trip and I work to travel, to be honest,
yeah.
right? I work to travel. I don't really need to anymore. Lots of great things have happened. Partner and I have set up great things. And so, but I like to work. I like to have purposeful work. I still really love helping people. The interview coaching, I really get to see their transformation because I see people come when they're super nervous. They don't know how to answer questions. By the time we finish our sessions, they're confident and they're winning in their interviews. And that is a visible transformation. And I love that. I love being able to see
Yeah.
that. So I think the writing side of the business will continue to die down, and that's fine. I'm going to channel my writing into the books that I'm starting to, the ideas that I've mapped out, for books that I want to write and teach people strategies. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so that a lot I look forward to, and it sounds great with the writing there as well. And obviously, if you're not needing to do people's CVs so much, there more time to focus on the writing, which obviously is a really passionate thing
yeah,
for you to do there.
yeah.
Wendy, it's been absolutely inspirational having you on the podcast. It's just so inspiring. Your strength, your courage, how you overcome things, the way you look at life, the way you deal with challenges is just brilliant. And anyone that's listening to the episode will get so much from yourself. And obviously they'll be able to find all your details in the description as well. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.